speaker, Arlene Anderson. Arlene has over 25 years of leadership experience in a variety of healthcare settings, including hospital systems, clinics, and home care. She has a Master of Science in Psychology, specializing in organization development and adult learning. She works with groups to build effective leadership teams and strategic plans, creating elegant solutions to complex people issues. She gets her point across in a practical yet entertaining manner. Now I will turn it over to Arlene.
Thank you, Kim. It's wonderful to be here, and I can say good morning to some of you and good afternoon to the rest of you. I'm very happy that you are making this investment in learning about resilience. And I can say that after 25 plus years in healthcare, there are urgent things and there are important things. And in some cases, resiliency can be an urgent thing, but it's also for sure an important thing at all times. And being an effective leader means that you can separate those two. And so I congratulate you on spending this next hour with us on learning about resiliency and how to bounce back. Certainly there are things in our environment that have knocked us over or are turbulent, and we're going to talk about some ways of dealing well with that. First of all, as leaders, as individuals, but also as organizations. And so we'll be talking about all of those things. My outline, my informal outline, is that first I'll be talking about what. What is resilience? Defining it, helping us understand what it is. The second point will be, so what? And in any presentation, I like to add, so what? There are a lot of things to learn. What am I going to do with it? And the third aspect of this hour is going to cover, now what? So there will be some powerful tools at the end, some ideas for you as you think about yourself, as you think about your organization, as you think about your employees. Of course, all of these things also relate to your care of patients. And so we'll try to touch on all of those levels during this 1 hour presentation. So Kim gave you a little bit of my background here. What it doesn't say on this list of descriptions about me is that I've certainly had my share of dealing with resilience. There's a little bit of a danger in teaching about this because things will come into your life that become very ironic as you're trying to think about how to bounce back and how to stay on top of things. And that's a wonderful thing. I've gone through moves, various upheavals in my physical world, some healthcare issues, family caregiving, death of family and friends, many types of things that have given me this wonderful practice in resilience. And I'll mention maybe some of those along the way too. But you have some of those examples as well. And if you have ideas and examples that you have want to contribute to the discussion, I would invite you to do that as well. And as Kim said, there will be a few times during this hour when I'll be asking for your input and your thoughts, so be ready for that as well. There are some references listed here. I just want to make sure that you are aware of these because as we go through, we'll talk about these various authors and their models for how to deal with resilience, and I wanted to make sure this was available to you. Well, let's see if this is anything anyone out there can relate to. I had a new computer, and I was trying to connect it to my printer and hoping that the two of those entities were going to talk and communicate with each other. And so I was trying various things, and my printer gave me this message. It said, there is no help available for this. Now, I had no idea that that was even possible, that a printer could tell me there was no hope. So I just wanted to use that to say that, yes, there is hope today. There is hope for learning resilience and becoming resilient. Computers and humans, when they're overloaded, they start to slow down and they don't function as well. But part of my goal today is to give you some hope. There is hope for this. Now, the measure of success is not whether or not you have a tough problem to deal with, but whether it's the same problem you had last year. None of us is problem-free. And so I used to say to my staff at the hospital, you know, I want new problems. And so a year would go by and they would come to me and say, well, Arlene, we have new problems. Are you happy now? And I said, well, yes, new problems are good. We know we're not going to get rid of them. And many of us try to avoid pain, but that doesn't really work. We know that things are going to happen to us, so that's where resiliency comes in. And if you think about problems and challenges as mountains, sometimes they're big, they seem unmovable. How are we going to get on top of these things and stay resilient? Well, one path up the mountain, I've done some mountain climbing this year. This happened to be in Ecuador here. But this mountain, just think of the types of ways you could get up there. You could go straight. And if you've done any mountain climbing, you will know that that is really not a recommended path. It's going to be very difficult and it will be exhausting to try to get to the top of things on that way. What usually happens is that we take a rather circuitous route, that there are detours on the way and maybe not a path we would have initially chosen. It's not the direct way. If we have trouble, sometimes we think, I just want to go from point A to point B. Doesn't usually work that way. So what I like to say is that nothing grows in a straight line. Nothing grows in a straight line. So if we can't avoid these troubles, how are we going to make the best of them and still get to where we need to go? Well, let's look at resilience. What is it? We've been using that word for a few minutes. And again, this is going to apply to you as an individual, as well as think about your organizations that you are a part of or that you are leading. Another level is going to be for patient care and how we can help our patients be resilient. But let's look at the first definition. The capacity to absorb disturbance and maintain basic function and structure so that when things happen, we're still able to function and we don't get knocked over for good. We get back up. A similar one, but a little bit different, is the capacity to function with a core purpose, meaning, and forward momentum in the face of trauma. So one definition is using disturbance, the other one is using trauma, but both of them are talking about something that happens to us, and the second half being it happens to us and we are still able to function. We don't just give up, we don't just lie down, we are still able to move forward with a core purpose and meaning. Now, the shortest way that I have seen resilience defined is the ability to bounce back. That's the one that seems to be able to stick in our minds very easily. So think about a ball. It might go down, but it comes back. It's able to deal with the kinds of things that happen to it. I like to think about it like a psychological immunization. It's not a once and for all thing. It can be developed. You can learn how to be resilient. And in a minute, I'm going to ask you to think about your answer to why is it that some people and systems bounce back and others don't. Think about your own experience, maybe colleagues or organizations or people in your life. You have watched this, that some people undergo trouble and difficulties and trauma and disturbance, and that's the end of them. That's it. They just are not able to get past it. Others that you have witnessed are able to bounce back. So what makes the difference? I'm going to ask you that in a couple of minutes, so be thinking about that as we continue. Now, the background of resilience started, actually there was quite a bit in engineering. If people think about if you were designing a bridge, you have to be able to design it in a way that it's robust. And you think about what does this bridge have to deal with? probably in some places earthquakes. So it has to be able to withstand the kind of trauma and disturbances in that area that it's going to probably face. Or buildings. Are there cyclones, typhoons? What kinds of things are likely to happen to this building or bridge? And so if you're doing the engineering work, you are designing it with resilience or robustness. Another background is from disaster relief and the study of the recovery of humans as well as nature after some kind of natural disaster. So 4 domains of resilience for a person, and I think about this as resilience fitness, the best possible health. People with resilience recover faster, and that has to do with the food, the nutrition, the sleep, all of those physical kinds of things. And cognitive resilience, focus amid stress, that we don't get distracted, we find a way to gain insight from what is happening. Emotional resilience, and this is the one that a lot of people spend time on as they're thinking about how can I face negative emotions and turn those around very quickly? How do we recover from those negative emotions that happen to us? Or making the best of our limitations. That could be emotional resilience. And the last one, spiritual resilience. All of these 4 work together to help us gain resilience. And spiritual resilience, I would relate to remaining anchored even though things are happening, focusing on the bigger picture or the greater good. Now, our ability to have these levels of resilience have to do with our genes and our life situation, the actions we choose, and our access to resources for well-being. And we'll come to talk a little bit more about that. The functions of resilience, being able to respond quickly in the right places and the right way. Not too much, not too little, but knowing how to respond. And having reserves. We have a wider space of operating, okay? No matter what's going on, we're able to deal with what comes our way. And the third one is keeping our options open. So that we have choices. We're not backed into a corner. So that is what resilience helps us to have. The benefits, just a couple of more. Resilient people are flexible, able to adapt to things when they happen. And they expect to bounce back. And you can think about people in your world. There are people you can think of that expect to bounce back. Some expect the worst, and guess what? They get it. The third one is that resilient people are adept at seeing things from another person's point of view. And when we're able to do that, we can recover faster, and we also feel more connected to others. So there's a lot about resilience that is positive. And it refers to not just the fact that we can deal with things that go wrong, but also that same characteristic is what makes us able to enrich our lives. We just have better lives if we have resilience. We can prepare ahead. We don't have to wait until things go wrong. Now, I asked you a question, or I told you that I'd be asking you a question, and so here it is. Why is it that some people and some systems bounce back and others don't? And this might be bouncing back from disturbances like unexpected events, stresses. I might also add that sometimes those unexpected events could be positive ones. Winning the lottery, or having a child join your family, any kind of overwhelming change. Why is it that some people bounce back and some don't? So I'm going to just ask you to add that into the chat box if you are ready to do so. I'll give you a minute. Some of the answers that have come in from other discussions might be that some people have friends or a support system that help them and others don't. Any other ideas? Another idea that has come in is optimists. Some people are just born optimists. Could be true, absolutely. And some people have role models more than others. So if you don't have any good role models on how to bounce back, sometimes that affects people's ability to do it. And one more answer that has come in, some people have a lot of practice. Well, certainly, some people really have had a lot of things happen to them, and so they build their muscles by being resilient, bouncing back from each of those things. Well, as I mentioned before, the ability to bounce back is influenced by our genes, and Dr. J. Brian Sexton from Duke University says 30% is affected by our genes, and about 70% is access to resources for our well-being. So that's an important part of this. Now, we've been talking about the what, and there's a little bit more to the what that I want to add to our discussion. Because resilience, as we said before, it's the ability to bounce back. There's a second part. The bounce back may or may not bring you back to the same place. And this is where it also comes into our topic today, which is resilience and change. So sometimes you might bounce back, but you don't go to the same place. So let's take a look at these two bowls here. I'm going to try to get my pointer. There we go. So let's look at this bowl on the left in particular. If you put a ball into this bowl, what you're going to find is that it will roll around on the bottom. It will have a nice little space where it likes to be and tends to go. And if you pull it up to the side and let it go, that ball is going to go right back down to the bottom, and this is going to be where it wants to go. So whether you pull it to the left or you pull it to the right, that ball is going to come back down to the bottom. And we can use that as an example of homeostasis, where we like to be, our comfort zone, you could say. So homeo means same, and stasis means a lack of motion. And we experience this every day. So think about your body. A body has a core temperature of 98.6 degrees if it's healthy. It likes to stay in that zone. But there could be very wildly fluctuating temperatures. Here in Minnesota, we are freezing, and I know in other parts of the world, down south, you might be already in the nice warm hot zone of the year. So a body, when we get hot, we sweat, and our body likes to go back to that temperature. And if we get cold, we start to shiver, and our body tries to stay within this zone of comfort. Now, it has limits. It has some limits to that. Another example might be a household furnace. So if the thermostat is connected to a thermometer by a switch, if the temperature drops, then the furnace kicks on, and it brings us back to this nice temperature here, this zone of comfort. So there are some limits, though, and sometimes we get beyond our limits, and something happens, either an event or some kind of trauma or a new idea, perhaps, a new role that we have that pulls us right out of our comfort zone. And here we are on the edge. We're on the edge of where we like to be. It's not easy to go right back down to where we were. We might want to do that, but we find ourselves toward a new tipping point where we are going to be finding a new homeostasis or a new zone of comfort. And the thing about change is that existing homeostases have to break down in order for us to get to a new stage of what's to come. Now, we actually experience this every day in small ways. It might be our opinion about something. This is our opinion. We find some facts. Maybe it's more like that. Another event happens to us. Oh, well, I thought this, but maybe maybe I have to realize I have to rethink my idea about this. So maybe it's a particular friend or a policy. We think this is good. And then we have some experiences and we start to realize, oh, I have to revise my thought about that person or about that policy or about that event. And you realize, okay, I really need to think about it this way. This is my new opinion. And maybe it's a new role. If you think about when you just got out of college and you had been working certain types of jobs, but after you graduate, you're ready for something new. And it's more comfortable back here, you know what you're doing, but okay, I'm in a new world now. I have to get a new sense of comfort where I am in the world. So that's the explanation of the relationship between resilience and change. And one of my favorite people, Tim Ferriss, likes to say, anything less than pure hell we can talk ourselves into. We like to stay in our particular zone until something happens and we cannot go back there, and that's how we get to a new place in our life. It might be a new opinion, a new role, or a new way of doing things. Get rid of my pointer there. So it might be a new self-image. Now, another way of talking about this is the law of disruption and reintegration. Because it's one thing to go through all of these things when we have, we might have periods of personal disruption, and if the world is stable, it's a lot easier to do. However, as we know in healthcare today in the U.S., there are so many things that are changing. The rate of change is picking up, and whole cultures, our whole way of doing business can be in disarray. So we have personal disruptions on top of those external disruptions as well. And that's why resilience is one of those very important things to take stock of, not just for yourself as a leader, but for your organization and for your employees as well. So let's look at this law of disruption and reintegration. Similar to the bowl explanation, you have something that happens, a change or a bifurcation point, some kind of stress, might be an event, overwhelming success, could be positive things as well. And what happens is our ability to go through our ability to sit with our homeostatic structure, we like our comfort zone. We really like that. But what has happened now is that we've got a disruption. And because of that disruption, we start to feel some chaos. Wait a minute. The world isn't the way it has always been. Something is different, and I'm going to have to rethink how I deal with it. And from chaos, you've got two different possible directions. You've got dysfunction. Okay, I'm going to blame the world. I'm going to quit trying. I'm going to become overwhelmed, or I'm going to have burnout. That's one reaction to the chaos that we experience. And the other choice is resilience. I'm going to bounce back from this. I'm going to find some way of coping with it so that I can think about the world in a different way. I have to reintegrate my thoughts about this so that I can get to a new homeostatic structure. So I'm going to find a new comfort zone after I have learned how to deal with this. So again, this can happen on a small scale every day, that we find something that has knocked us down, but when we bounce back to a new position. And I like this quote: a hard fall can lead to a high bounce if you're made of the right material. So in other words, if you have developed your resilience, and this is part of we're moving into the so what. So we've talked about what resilience is. We've gotten some ideas of how does it happen. Things have to fall apart in order for us to come back together. So the implications, some more of the so what of this. In order to experience meaningful change, we must fall apart. I'm going to let that sit with you just for a minute because we don't really like that part usually. We like for things to make sense. We want to make sure that we're functioning all the way through, but it is a normal part of becoming resilient to fall apart. And maybe that's counterintuitive, but according to the things that we've just been talking about, this is a necessary stage. And failure to pass successfully through any stress cycle can leave us without the strength we need the next time we have a stress. However, on the positive side, by making us more knowledgeable and adaptive, each period of disruption and reintegration is necessary to prepare us to meet the stresses that lie ahead. And I think about weightlifting. The more you lift weights, you start with the smaller ones and you build up your muscles so that you can eventually get heavier and heavier loads, and they are easy for you. I'll give you a quick example on a personal level. Some years ago, I moved from Wisconsin to Illinois, and I was a professional. I had a lot of networking friends and people who knew me and knew of my work in Wisconsin. I moved to Illinois where no one knew me, and there were new friends to make, new systems, a new job to try to get, and it was very difficult because it was the first time I had ever done that. And I actually ended up with a sudden success, and that was stressful. I didn't expect that, and it was still a lot of things to take care of. But, you know, I managed it. I was able to do it. And later, I moved from Minnesota to Norway. So this was another level. It was a different country. It was a different language. The only people I knew were my family members, and again, that was hard. It was a difficult thing to do. I lived there for 3 years. After that time, about 10 years later, I moved from Minnesota to China. I certainly didn't know the language. I had a lot of new systems to learn, but you know, it wasn't too bad. And last year, I moved from Minnesota to Ecuador, and it was easy. Now, what made it easy? I think because all of the times I had gone through those other changes, I was building up muscles for how am I going to deal with this? What actually works? And you can think of your own examples when you've changed jobs. Probably the first one was the most traumatic and more difficult as you had to learn some new things. Perhaps you've moved across the country, or you've changed houses, or maybe even when your children arrived, the first child as opposed to the third child. You probably were a little more relaxed, you were able to handle it, you knew a little bit more about how to function. That's the good news. The more things that you're going through, the more you are going to have some muscles on how to deal with them in a resilient way. And a lot of times, I like this quote, it fits a lot of situations. The world is round, and the place that might seem like the end may also be the beginning. So you are going to have chances to develop resilience. I'm not sure if that's the good news or the bad news, but things are going to happen. And particularly, if you are working in a rural setting in healthcare in the U.S. these days, for sure you're going to have chances to develop your resilience. And in a couple of minutes, I'm going to ask you another question. When you have faced difficulties, what helps you move forward? And you might think about some things we've already talked about, or you can think about just, okay, so when things have happened to you and or people you know, what is it that helps people move forward? So we've gone through the what is resilience, and we've gone through some of the so what, and in a couple of minutes I'm going to ask you what is it that helps you actually gain resilience and move forward. So let's review the definition. The capacity to absorb disturbance and maintain basic function and structure. So things happen, but you're still able to function. the capacity to function with a core purpose, meaning, and forward momentum in the face of that trauma. Very similar, but a different word, different way of looking at it. And the short definition, the ability to bounce back. And remember, bouncing back may or may not take you to the same place. It might be a different place of homeostasis. So think about this quote. The important thing is this: to be able at any moment to sacrifice what we are for what we would become. And internally, generally, that takes a little bit of time of reflection, taking a step back, thinking about, well, what is going on? It seems very chaotic. Well, maybe it is a time of change where you are going from one kind of homeostasis to another. Am I willing to give up what I have been in order to become something different and something better? And I relate this to the U.S. healthcare system, which is undergoing tremendous change at this point, and it is affecting all of the people working within healthcare systems as well as patients. Are we willing to give up what we have been so that we are able to become something different and better? It doesn't necessarily feel good in the middle, but what are we on our way to? So when you face difficulties or traumas or disturbances, what is it that helps you move forward? And I'll ask you to see some of your answers. Okay, let me look at some of the rest of these here. Support system in place, acceptance, people with guilt, the fight or flight. Oh, these are great answers. Coping skills, internalized beliefs, absolutely. This is what makes a difference, why some people bounce back and some people don't. Yep, and been there, done that, know what to expect. Feeling grateful. Gratitude is a very important thing toward bouncing back. Faith and family. Seeing what's positive, staying focused. The wonderful thing about adult learning is that you are not blank slates. You know something about this already. And these are great answers. So wonderful, wonderful examples here. And I'm going to give us a list of things that are possible, and there's no exhaustive list. There's no magic bullet here. So absolutely, time to play. Making time for play and humor, all of those things are very important for bouncing back and moving forward. Part of what's important here is for you to identify for yourself what works, because what works for one may not work for another in some cases. So great answers. So let's look very quickly at the adaptive cycle. How does this work? In any kind of system or even at personal growth, there are 4 stages. And the first one is the growth phase, underlying resources with coming together. And if you think about maybe even yourself getting a new job, you feel competent. You're excited about this. There are new resources. You're coming together and you're going to do something. You feel a little bit unsure, but things start to come together, and you get to the conservation phase. Okay, I know what I'm doing, and you get better and better at it every day. The system becomes efficient. Okay, I am knowing what I'm doing. I'm getting faster at it. I'm getting better at it, and you really can start flying. Somewhere down the line, you either outgrow that job or the job outgrows you, something changes, and you get to that release phase. The resources are dispersed, often in response to a disruption or some kind of collapse, something changes, and then maybe you change jobs. Maybe the job description changes, those kinds of things. And then you can come to a reorganization phase. All right, it's not the way it was. We've had to make a big change, and I'm going to have to rethink how I get through the day. And that can be the reorganization phase. Pieces come together in a new way. So it might be an individual, as I just gave the example, or it might be a new department or a new service delivery. Oh, here's something that we can do. We go through the growth phase and we say, okay, this we're going to try this new service and we're going to see how it goes. And as you try it, you start to realize here are some systems we need to put in place, and here are the people that we need to have in these roles, and it really starts to hum, really starts to go along very well. Eventually, there may be a time when, all right, it worked for a while, it maybe worked for those 10 years, or maybe even those 20 years. But now we're going to have to do something a little bit different. Maybe the payer system has changed. Maybe the players have changed. The organization has changed in some way. Everything gets turned upside down or changes and then comes together again in a new way. It keeps going through these cycles. Now, most of us like to be in phase 1 and phase 2. That feels great. And it's where we feel comfortable, and most of us spend most of our time in these two, and organizations spend their time in these two phases. What happens, though, is that this back loop, coming back this direction, it's when we feel uncertain, but it's also a time when we can experiment. And it's the greatest time, the greatest potential for change and creativity is down here. So in some ways it doesn't feel the greatest, and in other ways it provides opportunities that you'll never find in those first two phases. It's the back loop that revitalizes everything. And you may have heard the example of a forest fire. A forest starts to grow, then all of the trees grow, and it chokes out some of the new growth because it's taking up all of the nutrients. And a forest fire releases everything, disrupts everything, allows for new things to grow, and it revitalizes itself. Okay, so that being the case, we need to move to now what? So we've covered what resilience is, we've talked about the difference that it makes, and we need to move to how am I going to get it? How am I going to get it? And these examples are a combination of some external things that can be done, as well as some internal work that can be done. So again, no magic list, but at the end I'm also going to ask you for any questions, or if there's something that I have not mentioned that you think is really key to gaining resilience, I want you to add that as well. So I'll be asking you that toward the end. But the first one is one thing you can do to build resilience in yourself and or your organization would be to map your strengths, your fragilities, and your thresholds. And your strengths, you need to know, what am I good at? What am I able to do no matter what? One quick thing that someone mentioned to me one time was that you should ask 10 people who know you very well, what is your unique ability? It's a nice exercise. It was an interesting thing to do, just asking 10 people who knew you well, what is your unique strength? People thought of things that I surely didn't think of. One of them told me that people don't want to say no to me. Oh, what a nice gift. There wasn't something I did to deserve that, but it seemed to be something that people identified with me. So that's one thing, is knowing what your strengths are, and you might need feedback from others to help you identify what those are, as well as what are the things that might go wrong. Some things you can predict and some things you can plan for. Might be loss of funding, the loss of talent, the rules might change, and then for each of those things, try to make a list of what your options will be. And people always laugh at me because I have plan A, plan B, plan C, and plan D for many parts of my life. Well, if it goes like this, I'm going to do that. So that's one thing about resilience, is keeping your options open, knowing what they are. So mapping what those are, and then coming up with as many plans as you will need to be able to make sure that you'll survive. Now, those are for all of the things that you know might be coming. In addition, you're going to have unknown stressors. So try to prepare for at least the kinds of things that you know. Conduct experiments. And many of you are doing this. Maybe you haven't thought about it in terms of it's building your resilience. But if you are experimenting and trying things, that's part of maintaining your resilience. Could be mini projects or pilot projects. We're going to try this and see what happens. Might be telehealth, for example, or creating networks where you are connected with other systems. Just try some of those things and change before you have to change. I used to be in business with some consultants that always said there's no failure, there's only feedback, which was a great way to approach life, because everything was, oh, I learned something from that. So even failure, or a small failure, is like a vaccine, because you introduce a small amount of something and then it helps you learn so that you're better at it down the line. You may have also not thought about the fact that if you do not experiment, it's very risky. It's like a forest that doesn't burn, because we can get choked by our old habits and our old assumptions that we forget to change, and we'll stay at it if we're conducting some kinds of experiments. So you might want to deliberately seek out what's different or what's opposite. I used to come out to my staff probably 4 times a year. I tried to put it on my calendar, and the question I asked was, what are we doing that's dumb? And I have to tell you that unfortunately they never had no answer. They always had something that seemed to them, why are you asking us to do this? Why are we continuing to do it this way? And once in a while the answer was, well, this is why. And then it made more sense to them. And sometimes I would ask, what are we doing that's dumb? And my staff would tell me, and I would agree. And then we'd be able to change what we're doing. So sometimes you have to seek out those experiments or things that maybe need to change. Don't wait until they land on your plate. The third thing, maintain reserves. Of course, as an individual, that's resting, making sure that you have some financial backup, social networks, some of those things that you talked about before, your gratefulness, staying focused on some of those things. Because if you're down to your last dime, your emotional capacity, you can be sure something's going to come and kind of tip you over the edge. So trying to maintain reserves, you can't do it all, or I should say you can do it all, but you can't do it all at once. So I like to use the metaphor of a mountain climber. And if you think about those, you have 2 arms and 2 legs generally, and so if you are climbing up that mountain, you don't try to move all 4 at the same time. You move one arm, you get another grip on that, and then you move the next arm, and then you move a leg, and the 4th leg. So doing one thing at a time, maintaining your reserves, stay connected in some places so that as you move forward, you still have a grip on what it is you're doing. Develop social capital, strong and weak ties. And strong and weak ties are a well-known principle in sociology that what kind of network do you need? Networks are not created equal. So what you can do is cultivate that core close ties, those core close ties. Might be our family, might be our particular colleague that we feel strongly that we can trust and that we know each other well, we can work, we know each other's strengths and weaknesses. You would have a core of close ties that require time and resources to maintain. And you can think of, on your hand, on your fingers, who would be your core group that you can count on, those strong ties. You can't maintain a lot of them. It's that core group that takes time and effort to make sure that you've got those. And then what you also need is, beyond that core group, a lot of weak ties. Maybe people that you know, acquaintances. That's a very valuable network, because that's where the information is carried. And you get a lot of information coming to you because of your weak ties. They'll help you know what kinds of traumas might be coming, or disturbances, or they might help you know some things that work. And when we think about resilience, you don't have to make up everything. People are already doing it. So what experiments are they trying? What is working? What did they learn the hard way? You can do some of those things through your weak ties. People that you know, people that you talk with, they're not in your core group, but they are in your information gathering network. One last point on this one that I'd like to make is that you also need to protect diversity. The outlier, the person that is difficult for you, might be the one that's going to have the answer that you need. And I know I read an article about how Facebook is limiting our thinking these days. It's not Facebook, it's how we use it. And we tend to want to listen to people who agree with us and reinforce what we already think. It's important here to make sure that we have that diversity of thought and we expose ourselves to different ways of approaching the world. Even if we don't agree, it helps us understand it and it gives us some options. So protecting that diversity within your own life and within your organization. I know that in one place I worked, I had an employee who had been there probably 35 or 40 years. And no matter what we came up with, this person had seen it all and done it all. And he was a great resource, because rather than inventing the wheel and finding out what is not going to be working, this person could help us with the perspective, okay, how is someone who's been here a long time going to understand this? How will this sound? And it was a very valuable part of our diversity. We didn't always have to agree, but we certainly had to address the different types of opinions that were there. So let's go through. There's going to be 8, so we're halfway through some of these tools. Plan modularity and redundancy. So what I mean by that is, don't be so connected that one disruption causes a whole breakdown. And this one, you can also think about your technology or your IT systems. There are a lot of ways you can unplug one thing, the rest of it will still work. And that also relates to our lives and our organizations. How connected do we want to be with other systems, that if one part breaks down, the rest of it should still be able to function? So whether that entails succession planning, not relying on one person to know everything, but spreading around that knowledge so you have some redundancies. And also setting some boundaries, maybe between aspects of your business or your relationships, all of those kinds of things. Now, on a very small personal level, I'll give you an example of redundancy that's important, and that is your car keys. If it's 7:45 and you need to be at work at 8 a.m. and you can't find your car keys, you suddenly have stress and you need to have a way of having resilience. So get an extra set of keys. It's an easy way, just as an example, to build in redundancy so that you have the choice of resilience. You have got an option. It's a very small example, but that kind of principle in your life. 6, simmering. This is the one that's probably most difficult for me. It's where you let some things be unresolved for a while. Living systems are cyclical. It's going to come around again. If you don't know all of the answers, Here's what you can ask yourself. Do I have enough answers for today? And trust me, there have been times in my life that's as far as I can get. Do I have enough answers for today? I do. Okay, well then that's going to be enough. So sometimes you have to get used to not knowing how the story is going to end or exactly what to do. Most of us are okay for the next hour. So if you can be allowing that to happen, that's going to help you with your resiliency. Now these next two are extremely important points, and we could spend a whole semester, a whole week on each of these, and I just want to make sure that we've covered them well as we start to wind up here, is that establishing a mind-body practice. Have you ever driven somewhere and you arrive and you don't remember anything about the drive? I bet you have. So what I'm getting at here is that the mind-body practice is something that will help you to maintain focus and to gain insight and to actually be where you are. And some examples of this might be meditation. There are lots of types of meditation that you can do. The idea with meditation is that it will disrupt the grooves of your usual thinking. Usually that's by focusing on some object or a phrase. So disrupting your usual thinking, that's what meditation does for you. And I have to confess here, I'm late in coming to mindfulness and meditation, but I have really seen the value of this. Another way of establishing a mind-body practice might be prayer, communicating with a higher being, with whatever beliefs that you have, concentrating on the bigger picture. You might journal, so recording your thoughts or downloading some of those concerns. I've been journaling for 20 years, and it's really fun to look back and see, oh my goodness, I was worried about that. And look what happened, something much better than I anticipated. Or I learned that lesson. Oh no, I'm learning it again. There's a number of those as well. But journaling can help you. So use whatever resonates with your own belief system that helps you focus on the bigger picture and get that connection between your body and your mind. Last method. Now, many people who are teaching about resilience will start with this. I want to make sure it's an important point, so I put it at the end. So usually the beginning and the end. But caring for your physical self might sound like, well, of course you would do that. Let me ask you this. Are you doing anything to yourself that you would never do to another person? This one gets me. I have to ask this on a regular basis to myself. For example, have you skipped a meal when you're trying to just catch up with some of the work that you're doing? Have you come home from work late? Some of those things that, okay, there's a certain amount of care for your physical self that is necessary for you to have the energy to have that resilience that you need. So exercise, find something that you do and that you like. I have been a bicyclist and a runner and a hiker. There are many things I've tried. Nothing gave me endorphins until I started dancing. That I can do for hours, and so find something you like that you can do, that you can look forward to and get joy from to exercise. Sleep, creating an environment of comfort. And I would tell people that I'm with that I'm a really nice person as long as I get the right food and enough sleep. If I don't, there's no guarantee. So I already know what kinds of things I need. And you know what you need as well. And nutrition, slow meals, and maybe some small meals, but actually knowing that you are eating something and enjoying that as well. Now, as you look through the list, there are going to be some things that we talked about that you think, oh, that would be easy for me. maybe other things that you thought, oh, that would be hard for me. So in the chat box, I would like for you to, at this point, we have just a few minutes yet, but I would like for you to write down either a key insight that you have, either from what we've talked about today, or a strategy that you think might be something, oh, I didn't think of that before, or it's a reminder for me that this is a way that I can increase my resiliency. So take just a minute and think through what's a key point. What is something that you can do that you may have thought about before or may have just had a good review of some of these things. Allowing simmering. Oh, that's the one that's hard for me. Thank you for bringing that up. Absolutely. Sometimes you don't know any more answers than what you have for today. Any other key points? The value of diversity of thought and allowing simmering and maintaining reserves. Great. All of those things give you choices. Establishing the mind-body connection and giving yourself quiet time. And sometimes you really have to guard that. You have to guard it with your life. Okay. Keep those answers coming because they're important and they help you identify what was the key point. And let's see, I think we have maybe a couple of minutes. I think I have maybe 1 minute. A couple of quotes toward the end here, and then I'm going to mention a couple of resources. Dr. Amit Sood, who is, he has a website at www.stressfree.org. He has some videos on resilience, some tools that you can use that will help you on your personal journey toward resilience. And also Dr. J. Brian Sexton, who is from the Duke University, has a series of 8 webinars as well. It's called Wiser Resilience Training. Again, the National Rural Health Resource Center has some resources as well. So I wish you well on your journey toward resilience. A couple of last quick quotes here from people that certainly have demonstrated resilience would be, the bend in the road is not the end in the road unless you refuse to take the turn. And that was from Helen Keller. So I hope that you will take that turn in the road. And Viktor Frankl, who says that when we're no longer able to change a situation, we're challenged to change ourselves. So that's great. I see some of these other comments that you've made, and Kim has typed in the resources that I've mentioned. And I think our time is up, so I'm going to close so that Kim can do our final last assessment here. And I thank you for your time and for your investment, and I look forward to more work on resilience and to meeting you eventually along the way. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Arlene, for that great webinar on resilience. If anyone has a question, you can star 2 and ask now, or just go ahead and type it in the chat box while I finish up with some last-minute things. The recording of this webinar, along with the slides, will be available on our Help Webinar Playbacks page later today, and I'll send that out in an email with the link to complete the short online assessment, or you can complete it by just clicking on the link on the page. Use the links on the screen to register for any of our upcoming webinars or download educational guides or the toolkit. And if you have any questions or comments, please contact me at the email link on the screen. I hope to have you on future calls. Thanks, everyone.
The organizer has disconnected, and this conference will continue for 60 minutes.